There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear.
All right, so we're episode number 3 of Lexington Behind the Curtain, and today we have the distinguished David O'Neill, the Fayette County PVA. David, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, thanks.
Good.
Thanks for inviting me.
So as I'm scrolling through the different folks that I want to invite, I say there's 250 people that I want to invite, and talking about different folks and why I think they're relevant, and also how I know them. And I was kind of racking my brain because I feel like I've almost always known you. But in reality, I think we became friends over Facebook of all things because, Facebook's evil in a lot of ways.
It is, yes.
I think we were acquaintances.
Getting eviler every day.
I think we were acquaintances, before Facebook. But, we've had a healthy banter with each other for more than a decade on Facebook. And one thing that I've always respected about you is, we disagree a lot. But I think healthy disagreement is what makes us better, right? I know that over the years, you and a couple of other friends, I'll use Jennifer Miller as an example. I know she's a good friend of both of ours. You've had a positive influence on me in helping me to have a broader worldview, right? I know when I was in my late 20s, probably about the time that we met, I was a little bit tunnel vision. I had, if certain people said it, that's what I believed. And as I've grown and matured, my relationships with people who might disagree with me have helped me evolve a lot more than the people who agree with me,
Well,
So
it helped a little bit that you had the experience of a controversial alternative energy, field. And so that kind of gave you a different perspective that you might not otherwise have had.
I'm a Teddy Roosevelt guy, right? I'm all about the environment and about protecting it. And I've got children, I care about what we're leaving behind. I think it's really, really important. And I think too many folks in big business don't. It's all about making the dollar and not looking at what 10 or 15 years down the road is going to be. So, I have a daughter with type 1 diabetes, and it is a really big deal of what the medical system is doing, even to kids and big pharma. If I win, $1 billion tomorrow, I'm gonna spend the rest of my life fighting big pharma because it really is. I mean, you don't realize it until it impacts you, but diabetes meds and the insulin pump and the glucose monitor, it's about $1,500 a month in copays,
Wow.
So it's a big deal.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
One of the things I like to do is I want to hear who you are from your perspective, so if this were a job interview, give me your resume on who David O'Neill, the PVA is.
Well, I know nobody really. I'm just your typical guy. So I've been in the PVA office now I just celebrated my 15th anniversary, which
That's awesome.
Seems completely crazy to me. It doesn't seem like it's been 15 years at all because the job has a pretty long learning curve. Actually, I learn something new every day. It has a lot of moving parts. So prior to being PVA, I worked most of my career in the horse racing industry. I worked for the Jockey Club, which for those who don't know, the Jockey Club's like the breed registrar for thoroughbred horses. Mm-hmm. And they have a subsidiary called Equibase Company that's the official database for thoroughbred horse racing. So most of my career was with Equibase. I worked as the track man on the Kentucky circuit. So I would drive back and forth to whatever track was open, Turfway, Churchill, Keeneland, whatever track was open. I commuted that every day except for Ellis. Ellis is in Henderson, Kentucky, just outside Evansville, Indiana.
Oh, wow. That's a hike.
Right. I always said it's 3 hours no matter how fast you drive. It's exactly 3 hours.
Yeah.
So no, that one wasn't commutable. So, I did 7 tours of duty, 7 summers I spent in Evansville and Henderson at Ellis Park. So
yeah, and Evansville's a rough place. I haven't been there in a while. I assume it might be a little better, but
it's actually not. It's worse. So I hadn't been there in just a couple of times since those days. And the last time I was down there, I was driving around and was really it's unfortunate that it's gone downhill a little bit.
Well, I'd say Lexington's just the opposite. I've been here since the late 90s. I went to college at EKU in 93 and then went back to Louisville where I grew up. And then I came here in 97 as for a career, And when I first came here, friends, we were running around doing the bar circuit and all that. And downtown, there were like 4 or 5 places that you could go. And, if you walked from one to the other, it was a blackout from one to the other. And now, downtown is vibrant and there's a lot of good stuff. And the new Town Branch Park is coming. So there's a lot of good people that have invested a lot of energy in downtown. And that needs to be heralded,
Yeah, Lexington's changed a lot in those years. So I moved here professionally in 93. right after I started with Equibase. I started with them January 1 of 91.
Where are you from originally?
Williamstown, just about halfway between here and Cincinnati, up by 75.
Yep.
I went to the University of Louisville, so I lived there for a few years. Lived in Kenton County, lived in Erlanger for a couple of years. So coming right out of, still in college, I got on with Churchill, and then I picked up Turfway Park in Turfway Park in Keeneland, working in their publicity department. So that's what I was doing when I got on with Equibase. So I was in horse racing from about, 88 to 09. So
wow,
20
that's
years.
A long track.
Yeah.
My wife was the nominations manager of the Breeders' Cup when we met. Yeah, so she worked with Pam and Dora and all those folks over there.
Yeah.
And I think it was 04, we went to Santa Anita, and I was a volunteer to help them guard the paddock and make sure that only the VIPs got in. And I got to meet Chuck Norris and Bo Derek. And I was walking into the men's room on Millionaires Row, and Larry King slams into me as I'm walking in, and he goes down. And I grabbed him by his jacket and lifted him up.
You knocked poor Larry down.
He was a bag of bones.
I bet he was.
He was a tiny little guy, and he'd been drinking. And, I'm a fairly large guy, so he slammed him in it, and he was going to the ground. I remember grabbing him by his jacket and lifting him back up. I was like, wow, you're bony. So, but the Breeders' Cup is a great organization.
It is, and it's a lot of fun. I was there at Santa Anita in 04. Was that the year that everything was on fire?
Yes. The smoke was awful.
All of Southern California was on fire that year. It made it really difficult to get around because roads were closed.
We had a tip in one of the races. There was a horse that the owners were out of Owensboro. It was called Cajun Beat, and it was a 20-1. And they were like, I promise you this horse is going to win this race, And I was a novice at betting. And my wife's like, hey, go bet on this. We've got a good inside tip. And I ended up not betting right. And it won at 20-1. And she'd wanted me to go bet like $50 on it or something. So,
cool.
Yeah, I got it. I got picked on for not having good horse knowledge at that point.
Those experiences are good for the celebrity brushes.
Oh, yeah.
I've had a few of those over the years, too, because the press boxes at Churchill Downs is just off of Millionaires Row.
Oh, yeah.
So it's part of Millionaires Row, actually. The floor it's been rebuilt since then. So the press box that I worked in isn't the same press box.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a cool experience those years.
Yeah. We got to tour the locker rooms at UK last night during the game, and we're out on the floor and doing some things. And I had toured them prior to the 2012 National Championship. And I guess after the 2012 National Championship, everybody and their brother gave them money because it looks like a suite at the Ritz-Carlton. I mean, it is tricked out. I was impressed. So in talking to other people preparing for the interview, several people that I talked to this week were like, you realize that the director of the PVA or the PVA, whatever your verbiage is really the second most powerful position in city government, only behind the mayor. I didn't really look at it that way until a couple of people in the know were like, that's a pretty legitimate, high ranking. There's a lot of authority there. There's a lot of decisions to be made there. And I think most people just pay their tax bill and see your picture on it and don't really realize what all goes into what you do.
I guess I would like to dial that expectation down a little bit, So one distinction that I like to make on the PVA position is that it's not a policy position.
Right.
So I'm not a policy wonk. I'm not involved in any way in deciding what our taxation policy should be. Not involved in any way on, determining whether or not it should be 100% fair cash value or not, or determining, how much a homestead exemption should be worth.
I bet you get a lot of angry phone calls.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're handed the laws and we're instructed to do your best to administer the tax laws as they exist as fairly and as equitably as possible. And so that's what we strive for. So, I think by the premise that the job has power, then the expectation is you have, some leeway to do this or do that. And I don't really see it that way. I think the job is pretty straightforward. Here's what we have to do year in and year out. And some years it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And so the housing market being what it is right now and being what it has been now for many years, it just gets more difficult all the time. And I'm not complaining about the job, but I think the typical taxpayer, the typical homeowner is getting kind of fed up with the housing shortage and being difficult to buy a house. Now interest rates are up, so people aren't wanting to give up the lower interest rates that they've got locked in. So that's even further aggravating supply and demand because we've got a lack of inventory.
I've got just under 30 employees, and I think 26 or 27 lives out outside of Fayette County because they can't afford to live in Fayette County.
Yeah.
And then most of my people have company vehicles, service vans. And we spend $13,000 a month on gasoline, and most of that is paying for people to drive back and forth to work every day.
Yeah. At some point, in this process, and I don't know when it was, 2012, 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there, we became one of those communities that you have to now drive, get in your car, get on I-64 and drive until you can afford it.
Yep.
And, we hadn't been that before, we weren't that size of a city, but, but then also something changed there within the last few years where the surrounding counties now, the median sale price is just as high as it is in Fayette County.
Yeah.
So now you're having to drive 3 counties away.
Most of my people live in Lawrenceburg, Salvisa,
Right.
Cynthiana. You're right. They're more than one county outside of Fayette County.
So my office went in with the builders and the realtors and Fayette Alliance and the city of Lexington and did a housing demand study several years ago. It's a little dated at this point, although there's still some really good tidbits in there. And one of the things that we discovered in that analysis that most people hadn't known up to that point was that more jobs in Fayette County are being worked by people who don't live in Fayette County.
Oh, yeah.
So like 51% of everybody
that doesn't surprise me at
who
all.
works in Fayette County does not live here. And that was a real eye-opener. And these are industry insiders, these realtors and the builders. We did not know this. Commerce Lexington did not know this.
Right.
And that would have been roughly 2017, I think, that study was completed.
I tell you, the payroll tax is a real issue. I think I'm paying $8,000 to $9,000 a week in payroll taxes in Fayette County.
Right.
I've advocated, a sales tax for our community because so many people that, we're the shopping center for, 75 to 100 miles in 3 directions, medical center, the UK, right? Everybody that comes in, you go to Hamburg on a given weekend and 75% of the license plate are out of town, but our infrastructure is paid for by payroll taxes. And sooner or later, that's got to be altered.
Well, again, what you might not remember at this point was in the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, just coming in to the pandemic, we were facing a very serious budget crisis at LFUCG.
Yep.
And I say my office is actually a state office. I'm not part of city government, but we obviously work very closely, and my office is in a city building. And the city does appropriate some of the funds that are used to run my office. But, then once the COVID money came out. Now everybody's had this surplus for 2 or 3 years. And so it'll be interesting to see.
So much less,
It'll be interesting to see how we move back into that, at some point.
Into a normal budget process.
Back into a normal budget. So because the budget that we left before the COVID money was very dire.
Right. Well, and we're seeing that. I see that on the retail side. We're seeing people that during COVID, we exploded during COVID. We were so busy we could barely handle it because so many people were home, working from home, and they realized how uncomfortable their homes
Right.
were. And we were spray foaming attics and turning garages into offices. And
people were like, if I have to spend one more minute in this house, we're going to have to improve this.
I had one guy that I remember, his job was he sold remote software for school systems. And the city of New York was one of his clients. And he called me 10 days into the first lockdown. And he said, he was explaining what his job did. And he said, I'll be working from home for probably the next 2 years. And I just got the greatest raise anybody's ever going to have. I want everything you offer. And literally, it was the very beginning of the lockdown.
The deluxe package.
It was the very beginning of the lockdown. And we were worried what our customer base was going to look like, because we're in home, and a lot of people were afraid to have strangers in their home. And we did like $85,000 worth of work for this guy. And he had met me at a home show like 2 or 3 years before and saved my business card. And he said, I'm going to hire you. Just be fair. And I went in and I started quoting things. And he's like, well, what about this, this, and this? And I'm like, well, I thought this was quite a bit. And he goes, no, I want everything, And it was like, I went home to my wife and I'm like, we're going to be okay. Yeah.
We're going to make it this year.
And we just kept growing and growing. So, COVID was good. But, we did see last year kind of with the interest rates and everything, a bit of a retraction. I believe the recession that we're in started about a year ago, September, if you look at some indicators, or at least in some segments. But I also think we're on the way out of it. I think we've hit the bottom of that and we're coming back. I just hope they start dropping interest rates. I think we've made the correction we needed to make. It's time to what's your opinion on that? Where do you think interest rates really should be right now?
I've been expecting that sometime in the spring that we should see should see the first rate cut.
We're never going to see 2 and 3% again, though, or not likely.
Well, I guess not until, we end up in that predicament again where we needed 0% interest rates to recover from a calamity.
Well, I bought my first house in 96, and I had an 11% adjustable rate mortgage.
Wow.
Yeah. And,
and we're complaining about 5.5.
Exactly. And
half that.
I sold a house last year and I hated to sell it. I didn't want to move. I loved my house, loved my neighborhood, but I had a 2.82 interest rate, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm giving up this interest rate.
I know.
It's almost free money.
Well, and that's part of why we're having the shortage of houses on the market that we've got. People have those locked-in interest rates, and they don't want to give them up.
What the percentage of on market right now is in Fayette County? I know in Frankfort, somebody was telling me the other day that it's only 1% of the market is available, which is like the driest it's ever been.
I don't know. I mean, it's a crazy low number.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, talking about social media and things. One of the things that I touched on when we were talking the other day is, you and I are unlikely friends in some ways, just from political background, but we've grown fairly close in the last couple of years. And I talk to you a lot and call you for advice occasionally. But one of the things that I've recognized that we bond over is grocery stores, and I think I did not realize how much I truly loved it. I've done all the grocery shopping with my family forever. And I love a grocery store. And you were talking about it on Facebook, and this has been 5 or 6 years ago, on your affinity for grocery stores. And I'm like, oh my God, I never realized. It's like there's so much opportunity. You're walking around and thinking of all the things you do. And I'm a foodie. I love to cook. I love to eat. And my current obsession is Whole Foods. I mean, I'll go in Whole Foods and spend an unholy amount of money and then come home and cook wild dishes for the next 4 or 5 days. And so do you cook as much as you shop?
I do not cook as much as I shop. I do cook a lot. I am a foodie. Yes, I do have a little problem with grocery stores. I go to at least one grocery store just about every day. And
do you really?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Because I don't do big monthly shoppings,
right?
Where I make a list and do all that kind of stuff. And when I need something, I run and get it. And
you're single with nobody else to cook for the most time, right? So, I mean, you're cooking for yourself every day. Yeah. And I would do the same thing.
And I do. And I go to Whole Foods quite a bit. It's I like their hot bar and their salad bars, and they've got really good pizza too. Have you had the pizza slices? The pizzas are really good. They've always got 8 or 10 hot soups on the bar all the time. They've got a pretty good chili, although they cycle it through way too much. I think that it should have been on there every day all winter, but it hasn't.
Some restaurants really need that, like Smashing Tomato with the tomato basil soup.
Yeah.
That if they ever take that off the menu, it's going to make half of Lexington cry, because that is my favorite soup in town, hands down. Now you'll smell like it for the next day because of all the garlic that's in it, but it's really, really good. In Lexington in general, you interact with a lot of folks, probably more than I do on a daily basis. What are you most optimistic about that's going on in our city right now? Where do you see the improvement? Where do you see the needle moving? And from your vantage point, what's the next 3 to 5 years look like for our community?
That's a good question. Obviously what I spend most of my time on is the real estate market, the housing market, what's going on with sales. And, I see that tightening up a lot. So optimistic that maybe interest rates will come down a little and people start coming up off their houses. And what we really need that we're not seeing a lot is new construction.
Yeah.
So, it used to be prior to the Great Recession, prior to 2008, 2007, it used to be that there was a direct correlation between the number of houses that we sold each year and the number of houses we built each year.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously the number we built was significantly lower than the total number of houses that would sell, but it followed the same trend and the same curve. That's not the case anymore.
Right.
Since 2008, we've just built a flat 500 houses a year, every year, regardless of what our needs are, what our demand is.
Really?
It's just, this is what we're building. And that it's not regulatory in any way. It's, there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lack of available land.
Now, Todd Johnson told me not long ago that inside of New Circle Road, there were like 270 available acres of land to build on. Now, different size plots and things, but
actually, so one of the pushbacks So it looks like now that the city is going to expand the urban service area and bring in some more additional land. That'll be the first time that we've had an expansion of the urban service area since like 1994 or 6. It's been a long time.
Out right there at Richmond Road and Old Richmond Road? Is that what we're seeing?
There's a couple of different pockets. There's a pocket over around Winchester Road and the Expressway and New Circle out around Hamburg. There's another grouping of land available near Man of War and Parker's Mill Road. Okay. So there's a couple of pockets. So, but, obviously the builders and the realtors and developers have been wanting to expand for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And the arguments against it has always been that there's still 5,000 acres inside the existing urban service area that's buildable and available. But the argument to that is, well, define what available is. Part of that land is Overbrook Farm.
Right.
What's the motivation for the Youngs to sell Overbrook Farm? They're
hopefully
billionaires.
None.
There's,
yeah.
There's not a motivation for them to sell it. So, you kind of have to get in there and parse the language a little bit. What does available really mean? And so there probably wasn't 5,000 acres of available, but, obviously there is some. But developers, so during all of that period, our growth strategy was infill and redevelopment, to come in and, kind of one-off properties where there's a vacant lot here and there. And that's just not the way builders are set up to make a living.
They're mass producing.
Yeah.
I mean, like the Ball family, they're not going to go in and do a development if they can't build 100 plus homes.
Right. If they can't build 100 plus homes, they'll go to Tennessee. They go somewhere that they can.
Which is what they're doing. Yeah. They're in Knoxville. They're heavy down there.
Right.
And Louisville, so they're all over.
So I'm optimistic that maybe we'll up the new construction a little bit. I'm optimistic that interest rates will start coming down and people will start making some of the buying and selling decisions they've been putting off up to this point, and we can see this market level out and calm down and cool off a little bit.
So how much land in the new expansion of urban service are we talking about?
It's a few thousand acres. I don't remember exactly what it is because it's changed a couple of times.
Yeah. I found out recently that my new house is outside of the urban service area because we had a problem with the neighbor next door was renting the place out for Airbnb weddings and events, which is not allowed anywhere in Fayette County, but trying to get the police to take action in it. They were like, you're outside of the urban service area, so we can't do anything unless they violate Kentucky state laws, not just Fayette County laws. He also explained to me that I'm allowed to target shoot in my backyard. So if they have a wedding next door and I need to break out the 12 gauge to light up some cans, he actually, the police officer was super cool. And I talked to him about 3 different times, and ultimately he did break it up because after 11 o'clock, there's a state noise ordinance that he was allowed to come in on. But like the second or third time I talked to him, I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And he goes, happy hunting. And I was like, I don't know that I want to go to that at length, but fortunately we got that taken care of. But that's a real issue. I was actually interviewed on WKYT over it, and the reporter that was interviewing me, she lives in Kennewick, and there are houses in Kennewick that every weekend are having huge parties with like 20 cars. And, Kennewick, I mean, you can't fit 5 extra cars on a street in Kennewick, much less 20. So, I mean, the Airbnb thing, I mean, what's your take on that? How does, obviously you kind of have the grand view of all things real estate. I mean, there's quite a bit of Airbnb activity in Fayette County.
In the interest of full disclosure, I do Airbnb a portion of my home, the one that I live in.
Oh, yeah, I've been there.
So my thoughts on Airbnb is I think that it should be allowed. But I also think you need to be good neighbors. I don't have a problem with, we also passed the accessory dwelling unit, the ADU measure. And, the stipulation on that is one of the units has to be owner occupied. Okay. So I think that's a good introduction,
compromise.
So probably if you're living on the premises, you're probably not going to put up with 20
wild
parties every weekend. Yeah. And that's the theory. So, and I'll give you an example. In my case, I will not allow a local to Airbnb my house.
Yeah.
I have a pool, so chances are if a local is trying to Airbnb my house, they're trying to have a pool party.
Right.
And so, I don't need that kind of
that situation over in Glendover where that guy got killed. I mean, that's an ugly mess. It really is. I was talking to Joe Gothrop about it the other night, and she's just a wreck over it. I mean, they had a third party management company involved that wasn't checking the boxes they were supposed to. And There's a whole lot of unhappy people over that situation.
And apparently it's an issue everywhere. I have noticed over the years that Airbnb has gotten much better at working with the host, with the property owner, and identifying potential party situations and helping you get out of it.
So mine, the one that was next door to me, they weren't on Airbnb, they were on VRBO.
Yeah.
And I was told by somebody in the know that VRBO is very lax about that sort of thing, So, and it was funny, the property manager who was involved in managing the property, she had a somewhat of a unique name, so it was pretty obvious. She had left a review on their own property saying, great for weddings and events, even though it specifically said above the line, no weddings or events are allowed. So it was kind of like, we're going to do this on the down low and not say anything about it. And they just had a neighbor who wasn't going to let it happen. So it was unpleasant, but we got it stopped.
Yeah. Well, that's more of the RBO's thing. If you and a group of your 6 buddies want to all get together and take your families to Florida and rent a place, then VRBO is the place you're going to go to find that,
Well, and in Frankfurt, we've got a lot of customers right now that are doing the Airbnbs with the bourbon tours. My daughter and I were at an antique shop, and these 6 women come in, and one of them's in a floor-length fur coat, just dripping with money. And they're laughing and joking and have a big Southern accent. And, we struck up a conversation standing in line with them. And they were here for one of their daughter's 40th birthday, and she wanted to do the Bourbon Trail. And these 6 women all spent like 5 days doing Bourbon Trail, staying at an Airbnb in Frankfurt. And they dropped a couple $1,000s in this antique shop buying all these little trinkets and things, and had the lady ship them to them in Arkansas, of all places.
Yeah.
So I didn't think of big money coming out of Arkansas. It was one of the older daughters, and then Allison has taken over.
Alyssa, probably?
Alyssa, yes. Alyssa is who we used to. But so we sublet from Warner, and they deal with Lundgren most of the time. But we have a 12-year lease here, and we're 7 years into it. So, but we rented the building as a shell, and between Warner and me, we put about $100,000 in all these walls and everything that's in here we built. It was an empty warehouse when we took it over. So we put a lot of money into it, and I think, we got a really good deal on lease because we rented an empty shell, and they may regret that at this point because of how nice we've made it, because it is a pretty nice facility now. We're locked in, and as much as my business has grown, I need to be in a bigger facility. So,
well, speaking of money coming out of Walmart, I read a statistic today. Just take a guess at the net worth of the Walton family.
The Walton family combined?
Yes.
If you combine them, I know it's more than Elon Musk, so I would say $700 billion.
It was closer to a $250 billion, so it was like $300 million. Okay. So it's probably in the Elon, right in the Elon category.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
I mean, that kind of money you could feed every person, every poor person in the world. I mean, it's unfathomable though. You think about it. I grew up lower middle class. My father never learned to read or write. He worked the assembly line at GE his whole life. He retired at 60 and died at 62, and that's kind of what his people did. He was one of 17 kids.
Oh my goodness.
My mom was one of 10. Whoa. So I am one of 109 first cousins. So we have a big, big family.
How many kids do you have?
2.
Okay, well, way to dial it back.
No, I told my wife I'm 2 and out when we got married. When we first started dating, I'm like, I want 2 and I'm done. And I have 2 beautiful little girls. So little girls, they're 13 and 17, and the 13-year-old is 5'8" and on the volleyball team, and will probably be taller than most men by the time she's done growing. So
well, usually in Kentucky, you usually hear family sizes like that in the farming families. Keep having kids until we can get the tobacco house.
That's my family's out of the Bardstown area, and big Catholic family, and my dad's dad had 2 separate wives. So one passed away in childbirth after like 4 kids. And then the other one had 13 kids. So, and he was the second youngest. I jokingly say I didn't grow up in Section 8 housing, but they were my neighbors, so I grew up on the same street with Section 8. So, growing and owning a business and evolving in life, it really was not, as a small kid, it wasn't really what I thought I would end up doing. I figured I would end up working at Ford or GE or something like that, because a lot of my friends that was their dream job, to go work at Ford and make real money,
Yeah.
And if you'd have talked to me at 25, my goal was to either be a lobbyist or a legislator. I was very politically motivated in my late 20s and intended to run for office. And the more lobbying I did, the less I wanted to do it. Bob Babbage, of all people, helped me realize I didn't want to be a lobbyist. And now I lobby for the solar industry, right? I'm one of the top lobbyists for solar in the state of Kentucky. And we've actually beaten Bob Babbage a couple of times, which feels pretty good. But
so that's a pretty good example. I could see how Bob could convince you not to do it, because I am nowhere near as nice as Bob Babbage.
Yeah.
He's one of the nicest guys in the world.
Well, and Laura. I mean,
they're both gems of people.
Laura is just delightful. I've worked with her. We did some stuff at the Catholic Action Center, and Bob's whole family. I mean, his daughter that's running Babbage co-founder now. I mean, they're just really good people.
Yeah, they really are, and so they got the personality for it. I'm not an outgoing, overly friendly person.
Well, so the thing about lobbying that's interesting is you got to go into a room with people that somebody's lying, and it's probably a lot of people are lying, right? And you've got to recognize they're lying and still communicate with them.
And not call them a liar.
Yeah. And I'm not good at that, you know. So I know when we were doing something with the solar industry, Tom Eblin was in the room, and I had to make a speech to the combined House and Senate. And at the end of my speech, I made a pretty pointedly ugly comment about the lying and some of the other stuff that was going on. Well, Tom, he took the exact quote and put it in the Herald Leader. Oh, man, I had like 75 texts and phone calls the next day. And it was like, when you're in that room, nobody watches the KET of the live streaming, or very few people do. But when it makes it was below the fold, but on the cover of the Herald, I did get a little tough love from some friends that didn't think I should be saying what I was saying, but I say what I mean. I mean, if you're going to lie to me, I'm not going to lie to you. So it would not have been a good career for me. Let's just put it that way.
No, it's difficult to say exactly what's on your mind inside the halls of the Capitol and the Annex. That's for sure.
Yeah, you got to hold your cards close to your vest and know who the different players are and how to. There's so much. The adage is the reason that politics is so dirty is they're lawyers, right? Most of them are lawyers, and lawyers are paid to stall and to not make things happen. We need to send a bunch of salespeople up there that are paid to negotiate and only get paid if they win. Which you're not specifically not allowed to do in lobbying. You can't charge somebody based on winning and losing.
The case.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and maybe if you did, it would be, I don't know. The money in politics, we could go down a rabbit hole there that, just like we talked about Big Pharma earlier on. I mean, insulin there is not a patent on insulin. It is a open source medication, and for it to cost $1,000 a month is just criminal, I mean, so, but
there has to be some price colluding going on there.
It is. And it's, do you don't have to have a prescription to buy insulin? You can go to Walmart and over the counter purchase insulin. So it is not a controlled substance.
No, I did not know that.
Yeah. So I learned a lot.
I'm glad I don't have to know that.
I learned a lot very, very quickly. I mean, so she was 11 and she was about to start middle school, and she had been sick and not feeling good, and she went into a diabetic coma one night, and it was a very scary event.
Yeah, I bet.
And but one thing it's done is she has a continuous glucose monitor on. So she, we know what her blood sugar is 24 hours a day right by our iPhone. It communicates with our iPhone. And going out to eat with her and seeing what the food she eats does to her blood sugar has made the rest of my family think, well, we're eating the same stuff, right? And if it's not good for her, it's not good for us either. And I've lost 52 pounds in the last year. And part of it is being very mindful what I put in my body.
Oh, good for you. Look good.
Thank you. I signed up with Amanda Nybert for the intermittent fasting, the Faster Way to Fat Loss. And I did her program for about 2 months, and it just made really good sense to me. And I stopped doing the program, but I kept eating that way, And I'm like 7 months into maintaining the same weight. I want to lose about 15 more pounds. I'm going to do the Horsey 100 this year for the first time in about 15 years, and do the 100-mile bike ride around Georgetown Memorial Day weekend.
Cool.
That's
good for you.
That's my goal, right? So in moving Lexington forward, I know you get to interact with a lot of different people. A question that I've asked your guest number 3, so the other 2, and actually both of them were stumped by this, so I'm hoping you've got a good answer for me. We've talked a lot about, we're in a similar generation, and a lot of the folks that we're engaging with are in a similar generation. What about the generation behind us? If you had a standout or somebody you could say, that's somebody to watch that's under 40 years old, is there somebody in this community right now that you're like, hey, I see this person doing great things in the next 20 years? Is there anybody out there that because as part of this podcast, I'm trying to highlight good people that are doing things, but I'd like to feather in some people that are going to do good things, right? Some up and comers that maybe haven't made a reputation for themselves, but there's somebody that deserves to be interviewed and deserves to be promoted a little bit. I mean, is there anybody in your sphere that you're like, watch this guy or watch this girl?
Well, yeah, probably. And I can't really, I'm going to take a chicken shit answer, Jamie. I'm sorry, and not throw out names, but Commerce Lexington has a leadership program that they put on every year, and it's a year-long program, and they always get a couple of dozen people, and I'm always very impressed with what I see coming through there. So, I think you reach out to Commerce Lexington and get their alumni list. And
well, it's funny you say that. I told you off camera that the whole inspiration for this podcast was me. So I was an ambassador with Commerce Lexington for 3 years, right around 2, 3, and 4. And we went to D.C. We took 250 of Lexington business leaders and went to D.C. and met with our congressional reps and Senator Bunning at the time and some other people. Got to meet Martin O'Malley, who was fabulous, by the way, when he was mayor of Baltimore. I had great hopes for him on the Democratic ticket, and he kind of got squashed by the Hillary train. And then that's sad because I think he was a good person that could have done some good stuff. And we need more good people in politics. But that visit and that interaction with Commerce Lexington has been in my head for 20 plus years. That really there are 250 people that really are moving the needle. And that ebbs and flows, right? I mean, we have people retire or move away, and we have young people coming up. But I really do believe that there's a small nucleus of people that move the community, and the rest of us are just kind of living here, in their daily life.
I think the ebb and flow thing is right. Yeah. And I think that going back to the Commerce Lexington leadership, I think that there's probably different periods in your life where you really want to get involved in civically and do things like that. And so it's not the same group of people all the time.
Right.
People will get really active and give a couple years, and then they'll have a couple kids and maybe back off a little bit. And then the kids get older and they're okay being, away from the house a little bit, then they'll come back.
You've kind of described my story over the last 20 years because I was super involved and president of, half a dozen organizations and on a bunch of different boards. And really, my wife called me a nonprofit junkie. And when my youngest daughter was born, which makes 2, I was on 3 boards at the same time, and I was president of one of them. And, she was dealing with 2 young kids at home, and she's like, you work 60 hours a week and you spend 10 hours a week on nonprofit stuff. Something's got to give,
right.
One of the things I was very involved in at the time was the Lexington Forum. And unfortunately, the forum meets at, 7:30 in the morning. And when my kids started school, I was taking them to school at that time. So I haven't been active in the forum probably 10 years.
Well, so go back and do that again, because I have been involved, more or less over the years at different times with the forum, and that's a fantastic organization to find the type of.
So the chamber,
40 under 40 or the 30 under 30 types.
Anybody watching this and wants to get involved in this community, the Chamber of Commerce is the very first place, right? Commerce Lexington, Bob Quick and Linda Bobrowski and all the folks over there, they do a fabulous job of promoting business in this community. And we're lucky to have them. I mean, they were the number 1 Chamber of Commerce in the United States a couple of years ago. So, and golly, there's no turnover over there, right? I mean, the core leadership over there has been the same for 25
as long as I've been
years.
Active, yeah.
Really good people.
Yeah.
The second place I would say would be the Lexington Forum. I think it's wonderful.
For the audience that doesn't know about the forum, so they do meet early in the morning.
They do.
It's a breakfast. It's on campus at UK, and it's monthly.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll bring in a really hard-hitting speaker, and it'll be somebody like, for example, it'll be somebody to come in and explain the renovations going on at Rupp Arena,
right? Or
it'll be somebody to explain the Holly Wiedemann came in and talked to it when she redid the old courthouse. So it's a really good opportunity to get plugged in and understand what's going on.
So I was president of the forum in 2005, and I was on the board for about 6 years. And some of the best relationships I've got in this town were forged in those meetings. And I use the word mentor a lot. My father passed away when I was still fairly young, and there's been a lot of folks in the business community that I haven't had a direct mentor relationship with, but I've looked to them for that mentor guidance. Man, we talked earlier that I've called you, a dozen times over the years for advice. How do I handle this situation? How do I handle this person? And in a way, you've been a bit of a mentor to me. And, Stuart Perry, who was our last guest, he's had a profound impact on my life. And I bet 99% of the community doesn't realize that Stuart, he's the biggest State Farm agent in town, but he's also probably the most involved nonprofit guy in Lexington. If there's somebody more than him, it's one of his buddies, Ralph Coldiron. And, there's a group of those guys that have really helped a lot of young people come up the ranks. And got a guest, I told this story to Stuart, so I'm repeating myself. But I've got a guest that I'm going after in a couple of episodes. The average podcast only makes it to 6 episodes, and I've got 3 in the can as of today. So when I get to 7 and 8, I'm going to go after a couple of different people that are, maybe a little outside of my periphery. But one of them is somebody that I met on the forum. We were involved, who early in our relationship really didn't like me at all, and made no bones about the fact that they didn't like me. But we actually grew to become friends. And I grew to respect, they didn't like me for reasons that were probably accurate. As I was maturing, I started looking back and, I probably needed somebody in my life to say, hey, you should probably not say that, or you should probably not do that. So, mentors are funny. Before I started my business, I worked for someone that was not a good person. And I always say that he was one of the best mentors I ever had, because he taught me how not to treat people, right? Because he was very trying to use polite language, but he was bad to his employees, and he would do mind games with them to get them to do things and, manipulate this person to get this person. And it was just constant. And when I started my business, I was like, culture is going to be the most important thing for me. I want a good culture, and we really have a fabulous culture at my company, and we've worked very, very hard. And anytime somebody new comes in, that you start feeling ripples in the culture. I had a guy 2 years ago that started here that was a fabulous sales guy, one of the top salespeople probably in the state of Kentucky. In 60 days, he was toxic, and I came in and fired him on the spot. It was like, hey, I don't care how good you are at your job. If you're not good with treating everybody here with respect, then I don't want you a part of our team. And we lean into that with our customer base. We get a lot of folks out there in the community that refer us because, we are polite and pleasant and respectful. And I don't care what your race, your gender, your orientation, you're number one, you're my priority today. I don't care who you are. And that's what we preach to our staff. And I think if more people did that, it'd be a better place,
Yep.
So you gave me your chicken shit answer to that last one. Where's David O'Neill in 5 years, right? You're 15 years into being PVA. Where do you go from here? Right? Are you at the top of the mountain? For your political trajectory, your career?
I think career-wise, I would have to acknowledge that I'm probably on the downhill. I'm over the ridge and on the downhill slide. Yeah. So, I've been in the job for a long time, and I'm getting up there. I'm in my late 50s, so in 5 years, I'm probably
You're the youngest guest so far.
In 5 years, I'm probably crowding retirement, is my guess.
With your role, if you're in it for a certain number of years, do you retire? Because I know, like in the state legislature, once you're a rep for 15 years, you qualify for a retirement and health insurance for life.
I'm just like any other state employee.
Are you?
So I'm vested in the retirement program. So at any point, I can retire and get some type of retirement benefits. For me to get the full retirement benefits, I would have to work until I'm well into my 70s.
Right.
So I'm not going to depend on a state pension for a retirement on.
Yeah. What is the biggest misconception about what you do and what your role is? When you're interacting with the public and, the PVA in my mind, and I don't even know all of what you do. I feel like that the vast majority of the citizens, you're the tax man, right? That's what they think of when they think of PVA. To me, you're a huge resource. I am on your website almost every single day, sometimes 2 and 3 times a day. For what we do, it's by far the best. We work in 20 plus counties. It is by far the best PVA website in the area. I don't know if Louisville's different, but you guys have done a fabulous job at cultivating that
well,
website.
I appreciate that. So let's stay on that for a second. I think that the website is probably my legacy in the office. It is a fantastic resource. So when I first came in, there was a limited amount of information available on a public facing website, and so my background was in data.
Okay.
And so I came into it with the mindset of being a data manager and trying to figure out how to make as much data as possible available for data-driven decision making. And I knew that it was popular with realtors and with closing attorneys and appraisers and that type of thing. So I concentrated on it pretty significantly. And I took a year or two to really study what are other jurisdictions around the country doing, and identified what I thought to be best practices, what the pieces that I liked, the most from different websites, and brought them together into ours. And it's held up pretty well. The company that we went with is Q Public, which has since been bought out and is known now as Schneider Corporation. So we were the first county in Kentucky to use Q Public, and since then they've gone on and they now have a majority of the counties in Kentucky.
Yeah, but they're not as deep as your website.
The reason that I went with Q Public was they had this out-of-the-box solution, and part of their out-of-the-box solution includes some nice mapping features. And so that's the reason that I went with them. But, I also had a lot of e-commerce experience in my background. Mm-hmm. And so between the data and the e-commerce experience and having spent a couple of years really studying this across the country, there were some things that I wanted to improve on their out-of-the-box solution. And so we did that. So
you actually work with them to improve their software?
We work with them. So a lot of the things that we did, they then incorporated into their software, but there's also a lot of aspects of our stuff that's not part of their core software. And so that's the reason that ours is better than some of the others that you've seen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're on about every county's PVA site, and most of them are very basic, square footage and price, and that's it, So it's interesting. I would say that the website is a good legacy for you because, I mean, as the PVA, as a resource for the community, for what your office is, it's a fabulous website. I mean, especially
I appreciate that. And I
others.
encourage everybody to get on it. I'm sure most of the people who are watching this have probably used it in some way or another, but I encourage you to get into the mapping features. That's where really cool
the layers
stuff
on
is.
the mapping are really cool.
Yeah. And the aerial photography, the pictometry, you can go on and look at aerial photography of your property or any property in the county. And there's about 15-year history there. You can go back and see how the property has evolved over time.
It's how I found my leach field on my septic system.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. You can go back to periods of drought, and you can see where the green lines are for the septic.
So there's another piece of the legacy that I'm pretty proud of, too, and that's the assessment notices that we send out when the property gets reassessed. And it really is unique. There's not another PVA office in the country that I know of that send assessment notices like this, where we actually include the comparable sales right on the notice and include the map of all the sales in the neighborhood right on the notice. And so the problem with that is, yes, it's really fantastic, but people are still just as mad when they get that notice from me as they were when they just got a postcard. But they're better informed. So, so getting back to your question about misconceptions, one of the misconceptions, well, let me try to answer that question by kind of going through the whole process. So we follow industry practices in trying to determine what the market value of a property is. But we don't do full-blown appraisals. We don't go inside houses. So we use sales in a neighborhood and then make some educated guesses, make some assumptions on what kind of condition your house is in. Mm-hmm. We're the only government agency that I know of that actually has a legislative mandate to go visit every single property. Oh, wow. We have to do that once every 4 years. Okay. So we do, they're windshield inspections. It's not, anything too fancy, and we don't go inside the houses. But when we're there, we're making some assumptions that what we're seeing on the outside of the house is representational of what you would expect to see inside the house. Right. So if you've got some deferred maintenance outside, then we're going to assume you have deferred maintenance inside as well. And so there's a subjective aspect that when we look at the house that we'll say, okay, it's an A, B, C, D, or whatever. And so that's all built into a formula that uses information that we learn from sales and apply that information from a particular set of comparable sales to the entire neighborhood. And we make adjustments for differences in square footage. How many bathrooms does it have? Sure. Is it one story or two? Is there a garage or not? Is there a basement?
You're saying you're a little more precise than Zillow in the Zestimate?
Well, yeah, a little bit more, but not a lot more, because Zillow uses our data and uses data from the realtor. So they basically have a lot of the same information we have, but they don't actually set foot on the property like we do. So
yeah, but it's all over the place. I mean, they're you know, I've got a ton of realtor friends, and Zillow is the kind of the joke in the room. But now Zillow has actually started selling. You know, they actually have they're Zillow licensed agents now, right. Which is a little. Airbnb is now the largest hotel chain in the United States, and Uber is the largest taxi service. And you know, you're breaking those norms, and it's an industry that's changing a lot. And of course, there was the recent lawsuit that is changing the way a lot of realtors are paid and stuff. So. Right. Your industry will. I mean, you layer so closely with the real estate industry. I imagine we're going to see some significant changes in the next 5 to 7 years.
I would expect that's true too.
Yeah.
So back to misconceptions. So I consider the assessment process to be iterative and collaborative. So when we look at your house, we compare your house to the comparable sales, we make some assumptions, arrive at a number, send you the notice. On the notice is step-by-step instructions on what you should do if you don't think that we got your assessment right, including our phone number 5 times. So one of the misconceptions is, it doesn't do any good to call down there. They've got a budget they're trying to hit, and that's completely false. Right. There is no incentive whatsoever for me to increase your assessment. My job is to figure out what 100% fair cash value is. Yeah, most of the time, that's an increase. Right. Sometimes it's not. Back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12, it wasn't. Yeah. I did a lot of lowering back then. Hopefully we don't have to go back to that, but I would like to stop praising as much, because those are some pretty unpleasant conversations. So I consider it to be iterative and collaborative. We do make assumptions. When you get the notice, if you think we missed a mark, if there's issues with the property that we don't know about, then please bring those forward and we'll talk about it and we'll try to get to the right number. The other thing is, misconception is that, that we work for the city and whatever the city's budget is drives what we need to bring property values up to. And that's just not, that's the reason, in my opinion, that's the reason PVA is elected, so that I don't fall under the influence of a county judge executive or a mayor who's trying to make budget with property assessments. Right. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense. Well, thank you for your time. I enjoyed it.
My pleasure.
Hopefully our watchers here and listeners get a little bit more of a feel of one more person that's making a difference in our community. And I mean that. I wouldn't have you on the show if I didn't think that. I know you're a position of influence above and beyond your role at the PVA, and I do believe you're influencing a lot of young people coming along behind you, even though you won't give me any names.
Well, I'll give you some names offline, and you can invite them on the show. But it's tough when you know as many people as we know to start picking and choosing names that you're going to say publicly. That's a sticky place.
When I went to sell my house, I'm friends with 500 realtors, right?
Who do you pick?
Yeah, right. And of course. I've got a really strong relationship with my realtor, but I've got a whole lot of friends that refer business to me that are in the real estate world.
The way I've handled that so far is I've not sold a house. Yeah. I still live in my first house that I bought in 1993 for $62,000.
That's funny. Well, I've sold 3 in the last 15 years, and I've used the same realtor, and it's gone well. But it is a challenge when you have so many friends in the industry. Yeah, and the same way with me. I mean, I'm a heating and cooling contractor at my heart, and there's 200 licensed heating and cooling companies in Fayette County. 200. Now there's 5 that do all the advertising, so that's who most people think of when you first think of it. But when my friends or relationships or whatever go to do business, and I see a competitor's truck in their driveway, it makes me feel a little bit funny, but at the same time, I can't have all the business, so it's a challenge. But again, thank you for your time. I enjoyed it, and hope our viewers watch it, and we'll see you next time on Lexington Behind the Curtain.
Thank you.